begin the meeting. So really primary agenda for today is discussion with Mr. Alan Cathcart.
Steve, what's your last name, Steve?
It's Dukran.
I'll look up something.
Forgot.
I think I sent out the notes from the last meeting, the minutes, so.
The 27th of April on the website, the town website. I didn't see the newer one.
Yeah, so I think I sent those out in advance, so I'll send those out and we'll approve those at the next meeting.
Yeah, I didn't get them, so.
Yeah, I have them. I'll send those out. So let's just jump right in with Alan. Alan, first off, thanks so much for taking the time and extending your already long day a little bit longer to join us. It's much appreciated. You accommodating our schedules. Appreciate that. And so a couple things we wanted to accomplish with you today. One, so the charge of the White Pond Task Force is twofold. One is to identify kind of key issues going on around White Pond. What are sort of the major high priority items that need to get addressed pretty rapidly? And then two is what is kind of the committee or the governmental body in the town to provide the select board or in the town residents with information going on around the pond. So in the past, there was White Pond Advisory Committee. And there's some thought that maybe that wasn't the most effective way to communicate back and forth with stakeholders of the pond to folks who can make decisions and allocate funds. So those are sort of our two items we want to go through with you today. One is some of your knowledge of history and things that went on around the pond and where things stand today. What are some of the key issues? And then two, some of your thoughts on ways to most effectively communicate between residents of the town, the select boards, and the various departments that are stakeholders at the pond. So those are sort of the two items. So we sent out just some sort of general discussion topics, but those are kind of the two primary areas we'd love to cover today. And so a lot of that will be sort of history, background, and things like that. As we were talking about this, we'd have questions come up and like, oh, who would know that? And it seemed to be like, well, it was Delia or it was Alan. Those are the two names that came up again and again. So, so wanted to take this time to pick your brain on some of those things. So these were
Those questions.
yeah, what we emailed earlier.
Got it.
Yeah.
Right. All right. You want me to start in or?
Yeah, so
Let me give you a quick introduction.
yeah, and if there's a better order or but these are kind of the things that were on our mind, and,
All right.
and there may be some things that.
So I'm going to introduce myself.
Yeah,
Sure. Yeah. So basically a little background, with context. Again, my name's Alan Cathcart. I'm the director of Concord Public Works.
Okay.
I'm joined here with Steve Dukran, who is the town engineer. We both work within Public Works. So one of the reasons you hear my name bandied about when it comes to White Pond and water resources is I was the water sewer superintendent for the better part of like 24 years or something. So I have a lot of familiarity with the drinking water and wastewater issues of town. I was around when the town first was ordered to do a comprehensive wastewater master plan through EPA. The reason you do a plan is when your wastewater treatment plant is nearing its treatment capacity, regulators want to make sure the community has a plan in place so that there isn't a surprise that you extend the capacity of your treatment facility without managing, growth and development. And so when you reach 80% of its design capacity, you're obligated to do this CWMP. Because the comprehensive wastewater master plan involves, it needs community understanding and input and some decision-making activities as far as where and how are we going to allocate the remaining capacity? This study was performed with third-party consultants who are in the business of doing it. We had Stone Environmental started this work with Pio Lombardo Associates. They partnered and they did a phenomenal assessment of the existing wastewater needs in the community. And in essence, utilize sort of fairly new GIS or geographic information system software the town had developed to do literally a parcel by parcel assessment, needs assessment of wastewater. Concord's presently about 1/3 of the town is served with municipal supply. 2/3 of the community is served by private on-site septic systems. And so this assessment said, well, if we in the broadest level decided that we wanted to expand sewer, and let's say capacity wasn't the challenge, where are the needs and where would we identify areas to expand our sewer system? That was, we had two plans or two proposals. One was a maximum plan that said we're going to address most, if not all, of the existing needs in the community. And understand that would be one parcel that was on a small lot in an environmentally sensitive area up in north in Concord. If it would be challenged to do a compliant Title V system, it was identified as a need. And then they looked at all of these needs and kind of rated them and then decided, all right, this is a maximum plan. And what would it take if we were to extend sewer? And they did a minimum plan saying, well, let's say we have to be realistic and costs matter and all these things. We're then going to target areas that are more densely populated and have significant numbers of problems. The problem would be likely a system would require a variance to install or upgrade a Title V system. And so the plan went from a max where we identified parcel by parcel, where we said, you know what, we know there's areas that are in need. The Board of Health is now informed it's highly likely that when that is redeveloped or property change, they're going to have to issue a variance in order to get a Title V system in. But at least everybody understood why. So we did that homework. For those areas that were close proximity to the existing sewer, Bedford, Old Bedford Street, Prairie Road and Cousins Park area, they said we could likely extend the sewer system and it would take, X amount of money to do the extension, certain schedule to do it. And this is how much capacity that this new service area would add to our treatment facility. So it's basically an accounting of our wastewater capacity in an allocation strategy. It was a 10-year plan as far as phasing different phases of work. But what it did is it highlighted those areas of town that you don't individually have to come to the town to ask, can we get sewer? We have a roadmap. And if you're on the roadmap, the only thing we need to figure out is there enough interest and is the economics, feasible where we will proceed with an actual project. We only got through one and part of another section of extensions, which were feasible and realized. And we still have on the burner in our existing plan, which is something that was adopted and voted at town meeting back in around 2003 or 4, also certified by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs at the state to say, this is Concord's plan for wastewater. You've agreed to it. The committee that helped form it consisted of representation from the Select Board, Health Department, Health Division, Public Works, NRC, Planning. We want to make sure all the voices were at the table because some hard decisions had to be made as far as who's going to get this remaining capacity. Another tenet of that time was we want it to be growth neutral. We don't want to accommodate new growth. We want to have our capacity allocated for existing problems. It's here to help for environmental protection. It was a very interesting tenet, which was agreed upon by this committee, which is again inclusive of very interests. because once it was adopted, kind of set the management strategy for the town, which is administered through the Public Works Department, through the Public Works Commission. So here's the plan, you're the commission, you're responsible for the wastewater treatment system, the municipal, run with it. Shortly after that, we started getting rumblings of the housing production plans. There started to become state requirements for communities to start looking at your housing stock and figure out what are you doing with affordable housing. And all of a sudden it was a disconnect between, well, we have a lot of these properties that would be potentially developed, even if they had frontage to the sewer, hadn't been considered as part of taking that capacity that we had already allocated to these neighborhoods. And the growth neutral aspect of the plan was already starting to get stretched. Well, I consider it a little bit like Goldilocks, like, well, we want growth, but we want this growth, not that growth. And the plan can't do that. The plan has, by law, you have to establish what are the rules of engagement, and everybody's got to be treated equally. So we've been managing in accordance to this plan for the better part of 20 years. We've had different pressures to expand, but we've always used the plan as our compass as far as where and what would be the decision was made 20 years ago, what we're going to do. I'm going to sort of dial it in closer to White Pond. White Pond neighborhood was identified during the development of this plan as a high need neighborhood, dense population, lots of systems that would require, if they're going to be replaced, a variance to the Board of Health, a protection of a very important asset, White Pond. But the reality was it was an outlier to the centralized, the third of the town is the downtown populated areas, just where you can't really site septic systems. White Pond was identified as there's a need, but what we'd have to do is we'd have to look at a more local, or what they call package, treatment system, which would include a collection system that takes the wastewater from your house and then distributes it or collects it and brings it to a treatment facility, which can be a smaller package, they call package treatment plants, somewhere in the order of 30, 40,000 gallon a day facility or something. It's interesting that when we started this conversation, we had to include all the costs, including, well, what land is available to install. It's not just a couple complications, a lot of private ways. So for the town to advance the infrastructure improvements, how is that going to be handled and managed? That would be the sewer collection system. A site where you could put a treatment facility. It's a small facility, but it would include, treatment processes. It would be enclosed within a building, and then a leaching area to disperse the wastewater once it was treated. This is sort of conventional package treatment plant. I'll explain to this group. You can look over into Sudbury, and that new development, Cold Brook, or Cold Brook development. They actually have a package treatment plant designed and constructed as part of that development. And the challenge and risk, I think, 20, 25 years ago was there was concern about a treatment facility, a wastewater treatment facility in the immediate neighborhood. That was a concern. The costs, they were a little bit, we didn't have good numbers on those, and some of the complexities of the private ways. And in essence, we did a fairly detailed assessment of available parcels of land that could potentially be utilized to put a treatment facility in and leaching areas. We reached out to the school department. This was before they redeveloped the Willard School, to talk about maybe a combined, opportunity there. But regrettably, whatever alternatives we throw out there for discussion were pretty much rejected as far as non-starters by different stakeholders in the White Pond area. Having no traction, nothing's changed other than the fact that we still know the science that dictated what the needs were. We don't have to revisit, right? You hear about the eutrophication of the pond. But even beyond, and this predated the town taking over the beach, but there was an active beach there, so that was always a consideration. But just the development of those former camps to year-round homes were never really matched with today's standards for wastewater. So we don't have to revisit those studies too much. The needs haven't changed much. There would be nothing today that says those assumptions we made back then no longer, sort of merit consideration. They're all still there. But now the question becomes, what's the community will and interest to take this to, revisit a treatment alternative, like a package treatment and design. And it's regrettably not a small task. It wasn't easy back then. There may be a little bit more acceptance and acknowledgement that maybe there is no other alternative. And we can look over Cold Brook and see that, well, I guess it can be done and it doesn't have to ruin the neighborhood per se. But I'm going to suggest that in order for that to be realized, there's probably going to have to be, sort of a political will and interest to invest some money into, some engineering, some site evaluation. And I think really understand that I'm going to put this out there because I think my job is just to share what I can with the community. It's not my decision. It's yours. There may be some issues with some of the land use in that area, which is different. Some is private, some is protected, some is municipal. I would suggest you really got to look at this comprehensively to say, if we wanted to have a solution for wastewater, what's the right fit for the community and the neighborhood? And it might require realignment of some of those designations of, what those properties have been presently sort of identified for. And I say this because we have to have the conversation. Some is protected in order to
97?
Yes, Article 97. Some would require legislation to reverse it to allow for another use, municipal use. But there's a mix of properties over there where if reasonable minds got around a table, you might be able to map out something that really affects the interest in open space and protection, as well as the environmental interest. And that's what we're talking about with wastewater. It's an environmental interest to protect the pond and improve, the quality of the resource. So those are some tough conversations to have. But I think we're at a point where if we really want to see something advance, nothing else has emerged in the last 25 years. Say, oh, that if we had that technology or knowledge, this would have been easy. And now let's just do it. It hasn't gotten easier. But I think the will is now the town has the beach. The neighbors are sort of interested in exploring alternatives. We really have to sort of have that honest conversation of what could be done in that area. It's questions: can we connect to the municipal sewer? The proximity of that neighborhood and the distance to the municipal sewer is cost prohibitive. But even if it isn't, we are right now, and here's an opportunity. That plan, the CWMP, is over 20 years old. It's a 20-year plan. I think we could say it's to some degree the town has maintained its permit with the NIPDs. That's compliance with EPA and DEP. We've succeeded. We haven't violated our wastewater treatment volume flow, but we haven't realized 3 of those extensions that were identified in town meeting, that if we were to extend, these are the neighborhoods that we'd serve. I think if we picked up the pieces, reshuffled the cards, we may come out with different priorities. With it, now that we know of housing needs and interests of the town, some of the infill that's happened over the last 20 years, we might say, what, we have to reevaluate what our commitments are for these neighborhoods and say, are they really, is that the right answer? But we have different conditions right now, different drivers. And so that's going to be part of the conversation. And we are in the process right now of working with a consultant. And we've actually put a grant application in to try and get some monies to help us evaluate what we can do to try and help affordable housing. That's a big constraint in town. So White Pond is going to be a competing interest, is going to be maybe what about affordable housing elsewhere, which is a real driver, for the town. And it doesn't mean they both can't be part of a larger conversation about, we don't have to leave one out, but we might need to revisit the wastewater plan and figure out what's changed, what's different, are the priorities the same, are they different? And then map out a strategy of realizing, affordable housing is knocking at the door. The MBTA zoning you may have heard about, that's a driver through the state that requires communities to rezone the areas around their commuter rail stations because they're trying to encourage sustainable and, I think, what did Romney used to call it? It was the, I forget the term, but the concentrated, sustainable village areas, which includes housing, commercial, recreation, all that stuff. I'm blanking on the Romney thing, but basically, yeah, no, it'll come to me. But the bottom line is, that's the long story about the CWMP, which you'll hear about. I was around when it was developed. A lot of hours went into that. A lot of community meetings went into that. And that's why it's so important that we realize that that exists. And then the question is, when and how do we revisit that? And is it time? We still have some capacity at the wastewater treatment plant. We know we have infill, that's sort of redevelopment of the central sewer area where there's, you may remember last town meeting, there was the article about the depot rezoning. I don't know if you remember that. They were looking at possibly allowing for, increased density for housing and commercial development, both for taxes and housing interests. That was rejected. But if that had passed, the burden would have been, all right, now we need the wastewater. And then they would have come knocking at Public Works to say, this passed, now what? So we just have to be able to sort of know where the town's going and sort of plan a wastewater strategy that fits.
Couple quick clarifying questions. So you said the cost prohibitive to put the White Pond area on the current municipal system. Where is the closest? How far south?
It's
does it
down
go?
in, let's see, the Cousins Park area. There's sewer that goes over, just over the Assabet on 62.
Cousins Park?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, road school,
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
that
Cousins,
area.
okay.
Yeah.
And then for a package facility, how close sort of to the pond would it have to be?
It doesn't have to, there's a couple things that I've been thinking about. And one could be a full-scale package treatment to serve all those, and there's plans. So you can go online and you can look up the CWMP, Comprehensive Wastewater Master Plan. There's an executive summary, which is really good. It's not that long, and it'll give you a lot of the, the background that I don't have time to get into tonight. It'll identify White Pond as an area of need. But I'm sorry, your question, I mean, specifically
Proximity to the pond.
proximity to the pond. It's where it's being discharged that matters. So we've always looked at, you got to collect it from the homes. It then gets carried to a treatment facility that could be, it's the piping and land where you could put a structure. And then the real volume of land is for the leaching area. But, there's areas that, are open space now that could have a leaching area, utilized. But the level of treatment really is dictated by how much flow would go through it. There's been discussion of potentially not serving every need that was identified, but some of the more acute problem areas, and looking at maybe a combined, almost conventional Title V system, but just sharing a number of homes, but it's not the full-blown, treatment. And, that's a possibility. And we never went that route. But now that the town, is sort of looking at the quality of the pond, it's kind of like using the min-max plan that I talked about for the town. but then sort of drilling that into, is there a min-max plan for White Pond? And could that kind of inform a different treatment and footprint need for, you know, a facility or leaching area?
The PBD school land, would that be close enough?
Which school then?
The PBD? school?
Oh, yeah, they have a septic system that's not actually, I wouldn't say contiguous to the school. And I remember there was something where that septic system could potentially be,
Yeah, I'm just thinking with the new
There's a leaching
middle
area.
school, all the students moving over to Sanborn.
yeah.
Could that be a new usage?
That was part of the discussion. But I'm gonna, it's too far in the weeds for me to remember. But that was,
Just
A
thinking of things,
concept.
things that have changed.
Yeah, yeah.
Recently.
Yeah.
That's a change.
and the new middle school is going to have treatment. It's on a septic system, but it's going to have enhanced treatment. And it might be something along those lines that we look at for White Pond, for instance. And there's some values of, you know, potentially they have to be managed. These facilities need to be managed, but the level of management is very different than, say, what we'd have to do at, you know, our facility over off of Bedford Street. That's a very complex process.
You said the neighborhood was one of the objectors.
Oh, yeah,
And they just didn't want it near their homes, basically.
pretty much. And it was a hard pill to swallow as far as I got a treatment facility, you know, in my neighborhood, or what is it?
It was also a betterment cost. Would have
There'd be
been
costs associated with this. I mean, it's all, you know, sort of the cost. And then sort of the complexity, I think, with the private ways probably introduced some wrinkles. This wasn't easy because it wasn't conventional. When you introduce the challenge of a private way and ownership there, some of the houses that are along, so, you know, White Pond is a kettle pond, very steep shores. So to get wastewater from the houses that are right on the periphery of the pond, they're going to require pump systems, no matter what. You know, gravity, they're going to have to pump up somewhere. So you're going to have a pump system, maybe up to a gravity system that would drain to a treatment system that would then drain to a leaching area. But yeah, there was just not an appetite to try and realize that back then.
Alan, I had a question about the area that was being used or included in the wastewater treatment. And were you considering both the north side and the south side of the pond? Because when I look at contributing areas, it looks like it surrounds the whole pond, and I keep thinking that there's probably an inflow alternative to that. There's probably an inflow water on the north side and water exiting the pond on the south side. I'm a hydrogeologist, and that's kind of the analysis that I came up with looking at the pond and looking at the geologic maps and so forth. So I was just wondering, in your planning, were you including both the north and the south side for needing to be remediated?
Great, actually, John, and just so you know, I'm a hydrogeologist as well. So I'm kind of familiar with this stuff, and I can talk about the water supply. So glad you're on the call and plugged in. Very good point. And it's basically, we're trying to protect the pond. So what's the recharge, you know, to the pond? And John's point is it flows from the north kind of to a, you know, south direction, where we have White Pond Well to the south. The assessment was for all of the parcels in that sort of watershed. So it included both north and south. And I think there might be a way, when I talk about the minimum and maximum plan, that's where we start drilling in to be a little bit more specific. And maybe that could inform the flow and treatment process required in the leaching area required. So that's the next level of discussion I think we'd start having. But at the time, I think there was a consideration that if we're going to do something in this neighborhood, we're going to do it collectively. It'll be a larger group. You know, there would be, as Alyssa mentioned, betterments assessed and, you know, significant volume of flow.
Can you expand on that a little bit more? Who would be in that conversation? Sort of who's leading that?
Okay, yeah, great.
Who's invited to it? What does that look like?
So when the town did it 20 years ago, it was town-wide. So we had meetings in every neighborhood that would be impacted by a change. So obviously not in the areas that already had municipal sewer, but in areas that would potentially be extended and were likely and needed it. And we've been hearing they needed it for, decades. This was the opportunity to move on that, as well as areas that are well outside a service area. And it was just more informational. The town has done this assessment lot by lot. We've identified that, well, you, an individual may have a problem. Collectively, this area is fine. The preferred plan is to stay on your Title V system. So that was the message. So every neighborhood had the same attention. I would say White Pond had a little bit more attention because it was more complex. And it required this package treatment concept. I think Canantum was also another neighborhood that we'd also identified in a similar way. And they also kind of volunteered, we're not interested. The difference with White Pond and Canantum is White Pond itself and the challenges of White Pond, it's just sort of staring everybody in the face. With Canantum, there wasn't really that obvious driver. And so, I think they opted to say, cost benefit, we're not so sure. White Pond, at the end of the day, it's a cost benefit. And so how would we take it to the next step? This is what I think. We need to, and we're going to start reevaluating the CWMP because we think it's sort of outgrown its use at this point. It may be something that just requires to be revisited and maybe it's a little bit of reprioritization. It might not need to be redone, but we know we have affordable housing challenges. We know we have some areas in West Concord that we're trying to identify that could be sort of improved. And we know we probably have to say, if we're not going to continue to commit to extending sewer to those neighborhoods that we did 20 years ago, it should be done transparently. People should understand that. So that would be, require some community discussion. So I imagine at the same time, we'd say, and what about the White Pond, right? What's different now? And what could we do to,
The CWMP just sewers, or does that
just
also,
sewers?
or does that also regulate changes in septic systems? Like, can you go into individual and say you've got to upgrade?
No, so the comprehensive wastewater plan included a plan for wastewater for the entire town, including Title V system.
Okay.
They did, with an understanding. It was informative to the Board of Health to say, this neighborhood, you're gonna have to work with these
Right.
homeowners because they're gonna need a variance, so we've done the work for you to help them, but part of the CWMP is a water balance interest with, leaching of on-site, Title V systems was considered an environmental benefit where you could do that, sort of a treatment in a decentralized way. That's not a bad thing.
Yep.
Recharge to the river streams, that sort of thing. So does that answer your question?
So I'm just thinking, like, to John's point, if all the water's coming from the north, and I'm an engineer, not a hydrologist, if we go after those sources with a lower threshold thing, like not a full sewer system, but, and again, I'm not,
Yeah.
but like a super duper septic system, just individually, or
Yeah, those are,
is it, can you as a town go to them individual owners and say,
we force it.
force it, or give them an incentive, like a
Well, as-
help pay for it? or-
So when you say you as the town, I say you.
I'm sorry, I'm politically correct. I'm just saying, if.
When I go home, I'm on a sewer system,
No,
but.
I mean, anyway, but I mean, if it's a neighborhood doesn't like the sewer, the cost is prohibitive.
Yeah.
This big, could you lower that down and somehow offer a smaller package to go after the north side and offer a super duper something? I know.
That's exactly, and John was mentioning this, and this is there a minimum plan that we didn't really evaluate back then?
Yeah.
We looked at, when I say maximum, it's still a densely concentrated area. You kind of, when you talk about the neighborhood, but should it be more strategically evaluated to say, we don't have to tip into a full-blown treatment facility.
Right.
It's gonna cost, $15 million.
Right.
We can do 50% and it's gonna get us to a, $3 million improvement and we can do it.
15
You know, and
Houses, the problem.
that's what we'd have to evaluate.
Yeah,
And I've been going through that kind of assessment independently for a little while when I learned that that could be done, but it does entail understanding the ownership issues, the legal issues with the
right.
private ways, the haves and have-nots and all that, you know, and
But there could be, I don't like think about incentives for heat pumps.
Mhm.
Just to,
Yeah.
like I think it's $5,000 or something.
yeah, and maybe
Yeah,
maybe there is a way of doing it so the town could contribute, you know, because there's some value. Now, what's different now than then? But I'd say I'd caution, it's not that significant. The town having the beach, and I've heard and I've listened to the conversation, okay, town's got skin in the game, you own it. It's like, wait a minute, you know, and I was pretty mindful when the town accepted that, thinking, there's gonna be a catch. And the condition of the pond predates the town's
Yep.
ownership of the beach. And the town, and just for the record, I know there was some controversy because it's redevelopment, and I know there was some change to the property. But I think what the town has ended up doing is it is now a partner. Very different than it was, you know, just we're here to help. Well, now there's a vested into the town to realize this beach area and maximize that. But they did some improvements when they redeveloped, including some improvements for the stormwater
Yep.
system.
Yep.
And so that's just that's a piece of the puzzle, you know, I think.
Alan, I was wondering about the variance that you said homeowners would need. I don't understand what that is.
So with a Board of Health, if you have to go and design a Title V system, there are standards, and I don't know the specifics of them because I don't kind of review them. But basically, you know, whether there's offsets to, you know, a structure or a property line or whatever it might be, there's variances that make sense because you have to do the best you can with your on-site system, and you can only do so much. And the town isn't going to make that house a, you know, inhabitable, you know, dwelling. So they'd have to there would be an improvement if you replace the system, but they know it may not conform completely to the design standards that are, you know, identified in Title V. That's the code that, you know, sort of regulates private septic systems.
For
But-
example, even from the conservation perspective, not the health, if you're within 50 feet of the pond, you would need a variance from conservation because it's not allowed, but if it's there, you have to let people continue living in the house.
So at present, do they not have a variance? They don't need to have a variance, but if there
So this
were.
is where I'm pretty good at getting out of, you know, into my lane. This is a discussion you will need to have with Melanie Deneen, who is the director of the Board of Health. And I would say, going back to Evan, who needs to be involved? To be clear, just like when we did the CWMP, the same players to be successful, you have to have some planning people, some, you know, Board of Health, you know, people, Public Works people, select board, to, you know, make sure all the stakeholders' voices are at the table, because whatever is going to be sort of agreed upon will likely require a vetting through public, you know, town meeting and approval and that sort of thing. So you need to have that collective voice at the table so that you realize that, you know, whatever the interests are, you're addressing it or mitigating to the best of your ability, so that, you know, everybody, you know, there's not there's an understanding and a kind of collaborative effort. So that's why I say, John, not to skirt the issue, but when you start talking Title V specifics, that's not my area of expertise.
No, but I'm just wondering, like, do they not need to do Title V at present because it's some kind of private arrangement or?
They predate, they were installed prior to the Title V regulations, and they haven't changed hands that would trigger the requirement to upgrade.
If they did change hands.
If they did change hands, then they require.
Yeah, they would go to the Board of Health, and you're probably looking at very potentially site by site. There is alternative innovative technologies that exist, which, you know, give you a smaller footprint, can be more costly. But even then, what they'd say is you're making a net improvement. You don't necessarily completely comply with all our standards, but you're doing what you can with the conditions you have. There's an improvement. And, you know, we're not basically saying the property can't be redeveloped, but if it is or sold, then you have to do your best to, you know, bring it up to as close to standards as possible. And that's where that you can get a better description of the process through the Board of Health, John, on that. But no, they're not gonna sort of, your properties are going to be sold and there's going to be substandard, you know, septic systems out there by design, you know, just out of necessity.
There's no way to proactively help them change.
Well, so
You're getting incentives. I'm not-
no, there are incentives through
I know it's not a-
through the DEP and the Board of Health. They actually have programs where they can
Okay.
help, you know, with some of the costs and loan programs. But again, that would be talk to the Board of Health.
Okay. We don't even know, I mean, I mean, there's no way you know what percentage of the,
Yeah, we do. We have Jane Prentice
Yeah.
went around and did a survey. It's not 100% accurate, but we have that. We shared it before of the septic, who has a septic system and age if known,
right.
and location if known.
well, I'm saying we don't know percentage of what's a green, you know, green algae is from sewers or runoff or the pollen or, you know, whatever. I mean,
Well,
so I'm just saying,
we
if
do
you-
have the consultant reports that have made estimates of that.
is that, but I thought we had a huge variance on that. What I'm saying is if you eliminate these septic systems, smart, there's no guarantee that's gonna fix the blue green algae problem.
Correct.
That's right. It's
That's
one
what-
of the contributing factors.
It's one of, right.
Yes. Yeah.
So if we're done with wastewater,
Yeah, I
I
think
thought-
that's, and just so you know, these reports exist, and I've just given you sort of my recollection. But take a look at the executive summary for the comprehensive wastewater master plan. You can find it online and you know, it provides a good overview. But the process really is to, you know, how to reboot this. It's to, you know, draw attention that maybe as we're looking at the affordable housing, we should possibly consider some time to maybe, what about White Pond? I think that's a legitimate ask. I'm hearing it. And so my interest as far as, you know, your, you know, Director of Public Works is, let's not, if there's an opportunity, let's include that, especially if there's a grant and we can get some grant money to help us, you know, figure this out.
Well, and you bring up affordable housing because
Yeah.
it's more concentrated, it's gonna require
It's gonna require the
So that's
connection to the
gonna
sewer. Take
kind of,
capacity.
it will force the discussion in the town. So-
Yes, it will force it. So we're already starting wastewater.
Yep.
And we're probably talking about reshuffling the deck of existing capacity.
Yep.
And then it's a good
Now's
opportunity to
time
say,
talk about it, right?
what about? So I don't think
Yeah.
I think it fits. Yeah. So that's wastewater. I will give you a real brief update. John, fortunately on the call, he can give you some background too, but on the water, you had something on the well. Okay, just to, you know, help you understand that. That is a very important asset for the town's, you know, drinking water supply. We call it the White Pond Well, just off Hemlock, you know, Street. If you've walked down that neighborhood, you've probably seen it. That source is good for about, I'm just ballpark, 500,000 gallons a day. It's been in operation for, I've forgotten the dates, for decades, you know, I don't know, 70s. We did some redevelopment in the 90s. And there's always been a question, and I just sort of put this to rest. There was a question on when we draw down the water from the well, what's the impact on the pond itself? With a concern that somehow you're sucking it dry and we're losing the swimming and the resource. And as John alluded to, the groundwater flow coupled with the drawdown, the studies that we've done in the past, and some reports even that were confirmed through ESS. They did some work down, I think in like 2014-ish. And that's another document. does allude to the fact that, it considered all various contributions of, recharge and inputs to the pond, and they also kind of concluded that the operation of White Pond as is was not having an adverse impact on the drawdown or levels, elevations in White Pond. And that makes sense, from a, hydrogeologic perspective. And so that was an important outcome. There's no use to discontinue that well, the use anytime soon. There's no intent or, plan to expand, withdrawal from that site. So that's one of many sources of supply we have in town. So that's sort of on the drinking water side, most of the neighborhood is served by water that is provided from a number of sources of supply. So all of our sources go into one combined system. It's all interconnected. And whether White Pond is running or not, actually White Pond presently, when it's pumped to Deaconess well site. That's off of Ornac, across from the country club.
Okay.
And what's interesting is, just understand this, water is pumped from there to the Deaconess well site on Ornac and treated, and then put in the distribution system. It just goes to show how far you can pump water away from somewhere and then treat it. So the wastewater process is not dissimilar.
Yeah. It's like 2 miles further.
So that's the water supply side. And then really what I'd like to do is give Steve an opportunity. I'd like to put a muzzle on myself. And because some of the real interesting issues are more related to stormwater and the private ways. And so Steve, as a town engineer, manages both the stormwater and road work town-wide, with the fact that when it comes to a private way, there are some constraints there. So
Just before we shift gears totally, do you have any kind of feel for what does impact the water level of the pond? It seems to me, just anecdotally, it's on like a 15-year cycle.
okay, so it's
Some years it's up
John will
on
ask.
the wall.
Yeah,
and
so,
some years
yeah.
there's.
So it's
100 yards of
interesting.
beach.
We have and we operate and control Nagog Pond. And Nagog is a spring-fed pond. Bedrock is underneath it. It's a very small watershed, and we get lots of water from it. There are interesting elements of what a watershed is, and we think very local. We often think about sort of the topographic highs as that defines the watershed. I believe there's more regional play when it comes to White Pond, even Walden Pond. It's not necessarily reflective of the immediate weather pattern. And so you've observed that.
Oh, yeah.
And I have too. And I've seen it up at Nagog. So,
Yeah.
John, I don't know if you have anything you want to offer on that, but it's not as locally controlled as one would think. That's your observation and mine. But groundwater is kind of funny. And what's a little bit challenging is to really understand groundwater flow and elevations when you're talking about bedrock, which is there's a lot of transmission of water in bedrock formations that are sometimes in direct contact with the sand and gravels and sometimes not. But John, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, one thing about the kettle ponds that they have are surrounded by thick unsaturated zone. Then when the precip comes down on that, it takes months for the water to get down through the unsaturated zone if it's like 50 feet or something like that. So that's the case both for White Pond and for Walden. But for some of the maybe Nagog Pond might be thin. I don't know if it's got real high banks around it, probably not. And
Nope.
so it would the recharge or the would be more directly connected with in time with what happened with precip. So but that always fools people that they say, well, it's been real rainy and the pond hasn't come up at all.
Yeah.
And it's because it takes months for it to just get down, trickle down through the sands to get to the water table before it can get into the pond.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's the wastewater, water, drinking water, and now we're talking stormwater. And
All right, so again, my name is Steve Dukran. I'm the town engineer. I don't have the benefit of being in the town to give you any kind of institutional knowledge. So
Well, you have the benefit now
of
of a
listening.
fresh perspective.
First perspective, okay. I probably can't tell you much more than you already know. But so I saw your questions today. 3:30 to-
Or
at
2:30,
3:30,
whatever.
whatever, yeah. So in terms of what you have for drainage in that area, I went back and took a quick look at for mapping, and we may have it in town, all of your, if you have any pipe systems and outfalls and so on, but certainly not what I looked at today. I'm thinking if we wanted to track that down, if you don't already haven't, we could go to the the planning division. They may have records of what you have out there. What you have going to the pond as outfalls, what you have for collection pipes, with catch basins and so on. We are aware of some catch basins right off of Dover, at the intersection with Darton, because we've been called about those before. And we, Public Works, maintain those. Those are leaching catch basins, we believe, and they're in a failed condition. So we have advised those who called us, nearby owners, that they can hire, private entities to vacuum out those leaching catch basins out, and which I think they did, but I don't think they're still not functioning because they probably failed for good. And so now they're looking at replacing them. But aside from those,
Steve, sorry, this is Beth. Can I interrupt real quick?
sure.
We kind of did a survey, and maybe that's what you're talking about, the Dover Street Association, and some people where I live on White Ave, and a couple people on the other street near Thoreau Cove. I don't know the name of it. On White Ave, there's 3 drains, and 2 are really, they don't go anywhere. They're just pits in the ground, and we have, big problems. And of course, it's a private way. And then on Dover, so we all went in together and had those cleaned, and we're planning on doing it every year. But the ones that go nowhere do nothing. And so when the water spills over, just as Ellen indicated, everything's going downhill towards the pond. So, but we did get together and have them cleaned privately.
Right. So those 2 are not going anywhere. They're called leaching catch basins. When working or when installed properly, they have a bed of gravel all around, and then they can eventually get clogged up with fines, with sediments, and they don't work any longer. And they just have to be pulled out and replaced, and use a better standard, a current standard that works, better. Because the life is just so long, say 5 years, 5 to 10 years. And they should have a design today would have a sump where you collect some of the sediment before they start infiltrating for the, in the ground. So that will reduce the plugging of those pores. So, and I know we've been consulted about, can we help with at least with the design of the replacement. And Alan and I have been talking about that as well. But aside from that, and what was mentioned here, there's one on Shore Drive, and I'm going to guess that could be a leaching catch basin too.
Assume so. I didn't see any pipes.
We are not aware of, or at least I don't have a mapping of any of the other systems you may have around the pond. So, but we can, when we get some time, you'll go back and look in the planning division and see if they have anything in the original layout of the community. They might have, have some design plans, not necessarily as built, but design. So
I have heard tell, I haven't seen it, that on Thoreau Cove, there is a pipe that was put in that discharges to the property that the town owns near Thoreau Cove that does discharge a lot of water to the pond. I don't know,
yeah,
that's hearsay.
Hmm.
Through a reputable source, but
just keep checking the map. See,
it's probably not on any map.
not on a map. Okay, all right. No, I was just looking to see the roads how they arranged, but Yeah, but so you have questions about, let's see. What impact do you think they will have on the pond? Well, like mentioned, if these are not functioning, these catch basins, leaching basins, they'll just run off, on the surface of the pond and carry the contaminants with the runoff. So, and then there is a system over the park, the beach. The upgrade that was done recently, we got involved as in the engineering division in the review of the design. We weren't involved in the construction, so I can't tell you if everything, all the comments that we made were incorporated, but it seemed that the original design done by a third party, private consultant, was a good design, cleaning all the stormwater from the parking area and some of the water that comes out of Plainfield. They had adequate treatment so that the runoff there would have been, at least mitigated to some extent to make it a lot cleaner than pre-existing.
So I don't know, those designs are, the drains go to each of the, if you will, to their own septic system, is that a leach field, or how does that work?
A stormwater,
On the one that was installed, or at least I know you don't have
Right.
the design of it.
so they were underground storage to mitigate the volume, so it doesn't run all quickly into the pond. And secondly, they would go through through detention. They would cause settling of the
So it's like a
sediments.
leach field, it's like a leach field there.
I don't recall the exact designs because it's been a while. It's at least a year ago.
Sediments that are getting removed and silts. That's the with, when you're thinking septic system, you're doing nutrient treatment and all that. So it's different. They're separate. They don't go to the same systems, but basically it's using the environment around the structure to allow water to seep back into the ground, but removing the particulates, the sediment that would otherwise wash
So
in.
what I think it was, or at least what was designed, was underground chambers. And the first chamber will have like a sump where the sediments, the solids will drop up.
A nice
off
way
and
to roll.
collect. You've seen it?
No, it was on the plans, as I recall, yeah, yeah.
And that's
It's a
what-
series of trench basins that go down the road into a subsurface system. And I think
Like, would it stop phosphorus and nitrogen from getting, if, it was on the surface of the road from Plainfield, would it stop that?
some of it will be captured in the sediment. For phosphorus removal, that's a different design. I don't believe that particular one has, if there is a real threat of phosphorus in that runoff, then would have called for a phosphorus designed type, system. But the town will have to.
it's only
maintain-
what adheres to the particles,
Right. Right.
basically. Does the town, who's got responsibility for maintenance of that new ramp?
So public, when you say the town, it's always difficult.
Yeah.
I speak on behalf of Public Works. We have not been assigned or asked to maintain that infrastructure, but it's also, I will just put this on the table. There's been a lot of staffing transition over the last few years, even just in the last few years. But as far as the response from maintenance, I haven't heard a conversation yet that's engaged Public Works. Now, maintenance is, whether it's annual or every couple, I don't know what the maintenance schedule is. This would be something to,
Right.
and what that entails.
And that we can find out information, every plan approved by maybe the plan board would have a set of conditions. And there'll be a maintenance plan. And it could call for a 6-month cleanup of that system or yearly cleanup, but the owner is supposed to follow that plan.
So physically, DPW is the only one that could physically maintain it, but there may be another organization in town that has responsibility who would hire a third party
Could
to
be,
maintain it.
right.
There may be. And it might be in the order of conditions from the
That's right.
conservation department.
Steve, do you have a feel, how can we tell if? So these were put in a couple years ago?
So project was done
Time
last year, right?
flies,
Wasn't it
yeah.
last year?
It was all during COVID, wasn't it? It was a big blur.
Yeah.
Within the last few years.
Yeah. So how do we know, are these things failing? Are they working perfectly? Are they doing okay? Do we have, we have metrics that we're looking at?
So every approved plan comes with this LT, long-term maintenance and operations plan, right? Everybody has to file one. And in there, it specifies when you're supposed to inspect and maintain. So you get someone out it and they open up the manways, they look down, they measure what you have, and then you report it. And if it gets to the point where it requires maintenance, then you have to call out the.
Steve, could I ask you just to see if you could see what that,
Oh, yeah.
so we could understand this, because it hasn't been brought to our attention, but
Interesting.
it may be for a good reason, or maybe because staff transition. That's what happens when people turn over. Information doesn't get passed along, so it's a good
It'd
question.
be interesting if it's
Yeah.
another unit in the town or DCR, which
Yeah,
is
that's
Fish
right.
and Wildlife,
Right.
whoever,
Or if it's silent and doesn't, specify.
right.
Yeah.
Right now, it's very new, and it usually takes a little while for the systems to fail. So,
Yes.
And
Yeah,
failures usually fill and not be maintained. That's they're designed, as Steve said, yes. Over time, they have a life cycle that have to be replaced, but they're designed to be maintained for decades,
Mhm.
not to be replaced every other year. So, and maintenance is generally removal of sediment.
Yeah, I'm just thinking before they were put in, what were sort of telltale signs that we needed something, right?
So
Yeah, massive erosion.
yeah.
So this was when it
Massive
was
erosion right at the bottom and big plumes of
It was
stuff.
privately, so this was back when there was a system in the general area that the White Pond Association or the entity that owned the beach had installed. And I know this because there were some records involved with this design. It was privately funded. Public Works helped with the installation. I know this because someone brought me pictures to show me.
Speed bump, basically is what it was.
I don't know, well,
Yeah, where the water was going.
it would, but there's actually a chamber.
Oh, there
And,
was?
oh, yeah,
Oh.
yeah, and basically it needed to be maintained. But every so often, it was, I think, whenever the new water sewer superintendent came into town, they said, hey, you gotta clean your system. I was like, well, what system? And then you do a little research. I don't think that's ours, but I guess fortunately, Concord didn't have a lot of water sewer superintendents in the past 26 years. So, but I learned that this existed and it wasn't being maintained, and I don't know what the telltale sign was when it was failing or,
Yeah, right, so it's paved and then you get those 3 metal posts and then it's dirt.
Well, now now there's gravel. Now there's
Yeah,
gravel, which
okay.
is a
But
significant,
so that used to be
Improvement.
level and
Okay.
then it was 2
Which it
feet
dropped,
down
yeah. That was
after a
when-
number of years.
Okay.
Right, so every day it was just massive erosion, so
Yeah.
the pavement ended.
So it's pretty common thing for communities, for commercial entities, for municipalities to not address maintenance needs. It's deferred maintenance, everybody does that. And that led for years to having this permit, this MS4 permit that first came out in 2003 and then was reissued in 2017, with stricter, requirements. We're still grappling with those because now we have a commitment, an annual commitment to make improvements. So
So what is in this for?
it's,
what does that stand for?
Municipal?
municipal separate
Municipal
stormwater
forestry.
system,
Separated
separate, they needed to come up with something to make it for, so it's a separate stormwater system,
That's
municipal separate.
stormwater sewer
Sewer.
system,
Right.
As opposed to when you have a combined sewer, where you have both, stormwater and wastewater in the same pipe. So the town has, a current permit with a lot of requirements that we work at, making improvements. And it is required, fundamentally, for us, it's applies to property owned by the town. So it's a public right of ways and public land, public owned land. So the White Pond Park is one of those. And so that is requiring us to go and do that maintenance I was talking about, which I haven't opened up yet. Right? So we have to
No.
make sure.
The ramp you're saying is yours? The ramp?
Not the ramp.
It's,
not-
but it, no, it's publicly
Well,
owned.
so we
Well,
need
It's
to,
owned by the state though,
we
not
gotta
you.
look into this one,
Okay.
okay, because there's access. And, there's also agreements as far as responsibilities for this accent. Wasn't on the pre-questionnaire.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, right.
So it's owned
Reserve
by,
the right to revisit.
Yeah, that's right.
so it's owned by the state, but the project was done by the town.
It is a
Again,
state road.
Again, there's the nuances
Yeah.
that always,
Yeah.
sort of govern how we can proceed. And part of that governance is, well, why can't the town just do X on a private way? And it's not just the White Pond neighborhood. We hear this town-wide. And this is a dilemma in that there's certain standards for ways that the town, requires for it to take responsibility. And in some cases, when it's private entities have no interest in the town's business. And so the complexities are the responsibilities when it comes to ownership and easements and agreements and best practices and permits. We have to look at all those things to say, well, what is it that Public Works can do? Because if we're authorized, we own it. We own it. When we're not authorized, we've got to be careful that we don't assume it was like the pictures of the Public Works guys were putting this in, you own it. And then I did a little research, like, all right, I think we helped.
So, aside from the ramp, I think you might have questioned, what about your roadways, right? Private roads and
Yeah.
so on. If you look at an MS4 map for the town, you see that whole White Pond area is within what we call the MS4 district. The whole town isn't. There's some areas that are, the more rural areas are exempt, like the north side of town.
It's on population, really.
Yeah, it's based on, the mapping is based on population density here. But as far as the enforcement of the permit, so it applies to that separated storm sewer system, right? So you need to have a municipal pipe. So and that's what you don't have out there, as far as we know. You don't have a public municipal pipe for your stormwater. So therefore, until you have such, we have no enforcement action or application of the MS4 permit on your area.
I guess good news is we're not regulatory required, but the bad news is we're not regulatorily required.
Yeah.
So it's the MS4 is not the town. This is through the Clean Water Act, guidance.
So Steve, you're saying if there's a pipe, then meaning something's discharging through a
Right.
pipe, that's when
So-
MS4 applies. If it's just a road or it's just,
But if it's a pipe that was ours, if it's a pipe that was town owned, a stormwater pipe that collected stormwater from your areas.
Yeah.
Then where that pipe is outfalling, we have to regulate that. What we'll do, we'll go and, collect the sand from the outfall, see if it has contamination pollutants. And if it does, then we have to come and look for the source. And if it's on private property, we have legal right to go in there and make you correct it.
Okay.
Yeah.
okay. So so if it's just somebody's property and there's no pipe up against it,
No.
it is, or a road, like a private road.
Right,
is-
just, surface runoff, sways and so on, and not
Right, so this
not regulated.
pipe that I've heard about around Seymour Street, which discharges to town-owned land, but the pipe just appeared.
These
Is not-
pipes, they just grow.
But it's not a town.
It's not a town, it's, I was told it was discharging onto that town-owned parcel, but yeah, it's not your pipe.
No, but yeah. We are learning more about the MS4 program and, we do annual requirements like mentioned, and then we have to do reporting and the state's always like trying to, make things more stringent.
But most importantly, it's not sort of the authority responsibility, it's the intent. And so, what lessons are learned. We do best management practices and, what should this neighborhood do? Or, we're trying to look at the resource and say, what can we do to protect it? So I think that's part of the equation. And it gets to your point of, well, if we did, wastewater, that's a contributing factor. What about you want to make sure you look at the whole puzzle, so you're not just whack-a-mole, right?
Right. But that would be, I don't know if this is in stormwater, but like the farming thing, the agriculture, the field right there with fertilizer. And I don't even know.
We knew something about that, that they have not used something. We knew something about that they haven't
Yeah,
used.
yeah,
fertilizers
yeah.
for-
No, that's incorrect, Alyssa. We had Steve Merrill come to one of our meetings and he did mention he uses IPM, integrated pest management. So there is fertilizer.
Yeah, I know if you grow melons, which is, but my best man is a farmer, yeah, they're definitely fertilized, unless he doesn't care about yield, but. And he's got, Roundup resistant crop, so they spray the Roundup around
So
But
that's still
you-
not fertilizer.
No, I understand, but I mean, unless he's not interested in yield, he's fertilizing. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't.
My understanding was there was, but
I can't
that's
remember.
all
Yeah,
hearsay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we're not, we have no skin in that game.
But the stormwater, I mean, so that would be considered part of the scope of water coming up.
Oh, yeah, all these things would have to be understood, before we're gonna spend time, resources. The best management practices are things that just need to be done regardless, but I think for the White Pond area, if the town and neighborhood wants to see improvements, everybody's interested in the same thing, then, where it's cost benefit. Where do you identify what needs to be removed? What's the cost to do it? What's the benefit? And that's where the stakeholders, and I guess that would be, I would say, part of that discussion on land use in that area should be anybody who's, include Steve.
Ellen, just sort of a high level question. As you think about White Pond, Walden Pond, Nagog, Unersnack, Warner's, do you see certain areas doing things differently? Obviously, there's a slightly different environment, everyone, but do you see sort of different things happening that you think might be best practices at one versus another?
They're all very different, right? You got Walden, which has no development around it. It's, recreation and swimming. You've got the Warners, which is direct runoff from, Route 2.
Oh, straight.
Yeah, all sorts of, large watershed. And you're probably familiar with the discussion on to remove the dam for environmental benefits, and dam removal is a big, sort of area of interest, from, watershed groups.
The state too, I guess.
And the state.
Right?
Oh, yeah, exactly. Nagog is different because it's a drinking water source. And White Pond is it's unique in that it's a nice resource. It's got a lot of development, dense development. It's I don't know what size the little sub watershed is, but it's not that large. But best practices, it's not voodoo. It's literally just sediment management and nutrient management for the most part. And the challenge is the septic systems are a source of nutrient, and some of the lawn care is probably a source of, nutrients. Again, when there were camps, sure, there wasn't a lot of attention to the yard. It was, sort of, you go out there for a weekend, you get out of
Right.
there,
Yeah.
some sand around, great, pine cones, this is wonderful. When it becomes a manicured property, different attention. So, but I think it's just, there's no silver bullet for that one.
So
Yeah. I have a question for Steve for a minute. I might have missed it, Steve. You were doing, last time you came and spoke with us, I think you had mentioned, or Alan, that there was a town-wide survey being done of the roads. Is that including the private ways, or am I correct that you were doing a survey and doesn't include private ways?
No, the survey that we do, just for public roads. And it's a condition survey. It gives us, a condition level, which you call PCI, from 0 to 100, but it's really for the 108 miles of public roads we have. We do not do it for private roads,
So it's to see how many potholes we got. I think.
kind of, yeah.
Condition so we can determine what roads need what kind of attention.
Okay, and we couldn't, was that because it costs more money that the private ways couldn't be part of that study?
Well, it would speak to the fact that the town doesn't have ownership of the roads, so there is no, we wouldn't use, the public roads are supported through the taxes, and that's the source of, funds. So that gets into the challenge of when you get into a private sort of infrastructure, when do public funds get utilized? And I think, our position is we're not authorized to do that. There's probably ways of doing it, but it wouldn't be staff deciding to expand a scope.
Okay, thank you. I thought that there was going to be an attempt and, we all pay taxes. I was just curious if it was going to be included. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah, and what we do is for pavement, it's for pavement management. So if you have, gravel roads, that'll probably be a different kind of evaluation.
And
Right.
the other, the opportunity is, and Steve and I have talked, we see the challenge because you're not alone, if you're on a private roadway anywhere in town, ultimately there's the challenge of we have to do something to either maintain or replace. And it's not an easy decision. If money isn't the object, I guess you just go and, hire a contractor and just do the best you can. But money is generally an object. And when you do this kind of work, there's different levels of investments as well as stormwater management while you're doing this to ensure that you're not scouring the edge of road or you're replacing infrastructure while it's convenient. So I think that's at some point there's a tool the town developed back, in fact in the White Pond area, where if there was a collection of interests, an agreement that they could petition, I believe the Public Works Commission, to do a certain amount of work. But I think that petition also require, I'm not certain, but maybe town meeting authorization to develop a betterment process to cover the cost for the design and construction, reconstruction. So there is a tool, and Steve and I, when we can get ahead of the curve, are looking to say, how could we possibly look at all private ways and help where, it was through potentially a town meeting, sort of vetting process to say what public funds should be invested and how could they be done, to do maybe an assessment or maybe some design, maybe pooled construction, just to get cost benefit down, but we just haven't had the bandwidth to evaluate that. But that may be what you're thinking about.
Yeah, thank you. It is. Thanks.
I think we've just given you, there's a lot of meat on these bones. We
Yeah.
get it. And it's part of the challenge. I think you want to go, and the question is, well, how do we take this to the next level? Well, I think a couple things. We got the wastewater issues that are not just White Pond, but I think we need to make sure that White Pond's interests are at the table. And then there can be a decision, how far down that path we want to go. The stormwater system, at least in the town-owned land, and then, that large system, we need to do a little exploration. This is a good reminder that we should probably peel back that onion and find out what needs to be done there. The private ways and the private stormwater systems, we hear you loud and clear that there's an interest. There's been a long-standing interest, but now the town has responsibility for the town beach. Maybe there's more political will and need for the town to be a little bit more involved. whatever that means. You know, it's different than it was 5 years ago. So that's something. But realize that one of the risks is when the town gets involved and you start looking into it, ultimately there's going to be costs depending on, you know, what direction we want to go in. And that really becomes sort of a motivator or demotivator, you know, at some point.
I have one question. And I came here to give answers, but I have my own question. We get these isolated questions occasionally from individual residents that, you know, about drainage, about road condition, parking, speeding, that kind of thing. And our quick answer is, well, it's private. It's really, you know, your business, right? But we don't like to give that answer. We want to help you. We get a feeling that there are a lot of owners who are not sure about what's what. So I like to find how are residents organized generally, by street? Do they have like associations?
You know, have a little there, so.
Yeah, so historically, there was the White Pond Advisory Committee, which was sort of a body that was supposed to take the concerns of the White Pond area and be that liaison between that area and the rest of the town. And that's a body that is sort of getting reimagined and trying to figure out what is the best way to do that. Sort of informally, there are some associations and some neighborhood kind of listservs. A couple of them, some will be a little bit more formalized than others.
So there's the Dover Street,
Yeah, so the Dover Property Owners Association is kind of in Dover Street and all the streets off of it. That's one that's a little bit more formalized. There's a board and there's annual meetings and there's some dues and there's kind of communication is those meetings and an email list. There's a Friends of White Pond. So I'm not sure what the other neighborhoods have in terms of that. That's what there is on the Dover Street neighborhood.
There's Stone Root Trust, because they have deeded rights to the pond on Stone Root. So that's one group. And then, yeah, probably the most other active is Friends of White Pond, which has a presence now on their own website and on Facebook. And in fact, they're having a meeting next week. I can send you the information if you'd be interested in zooming in. But that's a group of, you know, volunteers who are, you know, talking about these same similar things, right, that we've just talked about.
Yeah, because as we discuss internally how we can help, you know, with at least answering the questions, we're interested in knowing that if we are going to help, that, you know, everybody who has ownership of a system, say one street or drainage or what have you, that they're all on board, because, you know, we just can't say help even 90% of the people. We have to help everybody who has an interest, a vested interest in that system.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it'd be good to know how, if everyone is organized that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess sort of two, or I guess one question I'm interested in hearing two very different perspectives from a historical standpoint and institutional knowledge. If you could kind of write the script, like, hey, we hear about things, we hear about it last minute, it's somebody yelling, it's, you know, so what are some things that you've seen like not work well in terms of communication between the select board, the departments of the town, the residents of the town, the residents of a particular neighborhood, versus when does it work well? When does that communication work well? When is there kind of proactive decisions being made? And it goes back a little bit to that question at the beginning of the meeting tonight of, you know, what do those conversations look like? Who are the folks at the table? You know, what is sort of an ideal way, you know, kind of, you could write that script. What does that sort of body look like? What does that communication flow look like?
It's a great question. I think the ideal is there's got to be a willingness to just sort of, it's a collaboration. And I think historically, again, speak to, you know, and this is not even current staff, but I know town staff has sometimes felt challenged when they get involved, that it becomes a contentious discussion. I've actually never had that. But the other thing is I'm pretty comfortable in the information I provide. I'm also pretty comfortable in what I can and can't do. And most staff is trying to help, and so I think just sort of an appreciation or understanding that the staff, and I know, with Delia, I know with Melanie's new. So she's trying to understand it. So I think sort of a partnership is what we're after. And that's just, sometimes it's been lacking, and it's not by regrettably a group. Some individuals can get some, pretty personal, and staff isn't here to get personal. That's what we're doing. We're just trying to, understand the challenge, the problem, and provide information. And I think just is the conversation, we just have to tee it up again. It's been teed up before, and it's just the time wasn't right. That's the bottom line. And there was other competing interests, but I think with the town having some skin in the game, i.e. the beach, knowing the neighborhood has been in need for certain sort of wastewater solutions that we talked today, a little bit about what John was talking about with the north and south, and maybe looking at a pared down, maybe we can't have the whole enchilada, but let's do something. A willingness to look at land use, I would say, in that entire area a little bit more creatively, and not just because this is locked away. Well, is locking away in the town's best interest large parcels of open space when it's compromising the resource? And what if we could do something different that moves things around, because landlines can move, and I think that would be it's a challenge. And one of the things I found, and this is the risk, that every stakeholder, we do this with every project, we may have 4 stakeholder groups that are all in, and one who is vehemently opposed. And what I found is the vehemently opposed stakeholder group will drive the bus. So I don't know how we work through that.
The democracy thing,
Yeah, basically. Yeah. But in Concord, people are creative, and they know ways of throwing monkey wrenches in. And so it's the same person who knows that will also know how to successfully make this other project. So I don't judge it. I just see the outcome is Concord doesn't get what it really deserves, because it's aspirational. You look, all the aspirations that we have, we don't realize a lot of it. Part of it's because, the democracy part.
Well, that's what I was asking about being authoritarian. I mean, like, just tell them they gotta do the septic, or like I was gonna ask too, like, you can't use fertilizer on your lawn if you're within this. I mean, but there's no authority. I know, I don't mean that, but I mean,
So let's
there's
put
no
down-
authority. Yeah.
That's a question, right?
Yeah.
Where can you draw the line? Right? That's a
I mean,
question.
obviously, there's some laws like you can't.
Well, that's like the MS4, for instance. So
Yeah.
now that's a question on the table. Where can you actually draw a line and say this can't happen?
Yeah, based on this pond, you
Mhm.
Kettle Pond and next, I don't know, you can't fertilize your lawn in this
Mhm.
watershed.
Or-
I don't know.
Or you need to tie in to the smaller scale shared system,
Right.
because it's just got to be done. And, maybe the authorities, and then it's incentivized because it's a broader good, you don't have a choice, but
Well, it seems
these,
like there's
these 10 homes have to be treated.
I mean, they're giving them $5,000 for a heat pump right now.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I keep hearing about all the billions of dollars coming from the federal government. It's, it seems to be a wash, but it's the same billion being spent
Yeah.
4 billion
Yeah,
times.
there you go. There you go.
Yeah, I have a question about taxes, actually. So for people that have private ways and so forth, are their taxes lower than those residences in the town that have public roads?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be able to speak to that as Public Works Director, but the assessor, town assessor would be able to tell you. I don't know.
I did check with them
Okay.
a couple of years ago. And the answer, I got back, which I was surprised myself. Because in my own town, it's different. They said, no, the tax rate stays the same.
The tax rate per 1,000 assessed value is the
Yes.
same.
It's the same.
I guess you make an argument assessments less because they don't have they gotta maintain their own road. That's
That's right. That would be one of the
Maybe,
conversations.
but when you look at the assessor's cards, I don't see a box for that to be checked.
right.
Assessments are usually done by market appraisers. So,
Right, and comps.
right.
But that's a good point, really, for other discussion, isn't it? Because that goes back to the same question about the private roads and if they're contributing to the runoff and et cetera. If you're not getting any kind of rebate or, reduction, could we get these included in the studies or get something done? It's interesting.
So I'm only telling you what they told me now. But the person who told me that maybe stand corrected, but I don't know. But you can double check yourselves.
That's a great question, right? Are they using comps to come up with that assessed value, and are they adjusting those comps for private or public roadway? I can hazard a guess what the answer is.
I see my assessment go up, I get really excited and really angry. Right. Anyway.
Anything we didn't ask you that you thought we'd ask you?
No, these are the themes. Go ahead.
So,
Yeah, so what was that question?
I didn't make it on that. Well, only because, I believe there's a big potential for a lot of people to be accessing Sachem Cove much more than previously because of the Coldbrook development,
Okay, absolutely.
which means there'll be a lot more trash generated in that area, and the Sachem Cove is not far from Bruce Freeman.
Mhm.
So just theoretically, is it possible for there to be any kind of trash collection service added to the original, to the existing trash collection service? If there were like a bin on the Bruce Freeman. And that DPW could add to their, sites where they remove
So-
trash on a regular basis.
So basically, the curbside collection, trash collection is one supported by, it's an enterprise, so it's supported by those people who use the service. And then for the municipal services, that would be through the development of the budget process. So could service be provided? We could probably come up with a number of what that would entail. But then the cost would be have to be absorbed in the general fund.
Right. And it would require access to Bruce Freeman, some sort of
So the cost would be dependent upon these conditions of what.
Anybody have anything else for Alan or Steve? Any other business anybody would like to discuss?
I was just thinking, when you bring up the cove, I mean, is there the ranger? There was.
Yes.
There is still,
There is.
okay, so that's.
Yeah, the ranger hired for the summer, yes.
One
Gosh.
ranger this year, Delia reported to us.
Yeah, in covering the cove area as well as some other areas around town.
And is there signage about that folks can go to the White Pond and pay $5 to swim there? Well, I mean, I was not White Pond, I mean, the beach area.
Yeah, I'm not sure what there is for signage. That is sort of the Rangers' marching orders is to deliver that message.
Great.
How you doing? Thank you both so much for joining us. I have to get off for another call. Thanks again.
Terrific. Thanks, Beth.
Yeah.
Motion to adjourn?
It's very much a democracy, not much I, very quickly here.